let's do it again. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. If we're going to do it at all, let's do it properly. Now it's time for this.
Order. I call Matt Chorley and
Patrick Maguire. It's fine. I think as a rehearsal, it's going all right. And once we do it live on the radio...
Once we're on air, yeah. Once we're on air,
we're totally fine. Patrick Maguire's here, Red Box Editor. How are you?
I'm very well.
Big PMQs today. What do we think that Keir Starmer will go on?
I think he'll open with the line about football. I'm sure he's also going to taking a trip to Northern Ireland.
Keir Starmer's going to Northern Ireland.
Yeah, this week, so he might take a flick of that. But I think there's only one issue on the agenda, and it's July the 19th.
July the 19th. I thought you were going to say the football.
Well, yes. Sorry. I want to maintain a semblance of professionalism and engagement today for the benefit of your listeners.
Oh, well, I wouldn't worry about that too much. Boris Johnson is in the House of Commons. He's wearing a St George's Cross badge to indicate it's rather smaller than the flag that he had outside Downing Street, but he has got a little badge on. Which is interesting. There's a couple of backbench questions, and then we'll go to Keir Starmer live in the House of Commons. It'll be interesting to see if Keir Starmer's worked out a way of criticising Boris Johnson's plans on July the 19th, because in the immediate aftermath of Boris Johnson's press conference on Monday, Keir Starmer didn't really seem to know what it was he wasn't happy about.
Yes, exactly. But I think Labour has a line that they obviously honed on yesterday's broadcast round. Now, you might saying that we have to have restrictions in place until every building that's open to the public has a fully functioning ventilator, brand spanking new ventilation system, isn't feasible or whatever. But they have a clear line now, and it's basically restrictions to stay for the time being. So I think he'll pursue that.
But without, I suppose he's he's looked at the opinion polls, and people seem to quite like the restrictions, and
yes.
and all of that. So you put yourself on the right side.
I'd be interested to see as well. Not to say I'm the most influential person in British politics, although I'd say I'm definitely in the top one. After our last session, I went for lunch with someone quite close to Keir Starmer, and I suggested the point I made last week about the vaccine rollout really slowing. I said you should really get on that. So. All I'm saying is, if you hear Keir Starmer criticising the slow speed of the rollout, this guy.
That's you're basically You're basically now an advisor to Keir Starmer. I mean, not everyone would necessarily brag about that, but that's up to you, Patrick Maguire. Well, let's find out if Keir Starmer is going to take Patrick Maguire's advice via his lunch partner. We can go live to the House of Commons now. Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, with his first question to Boris Johnson.
Agreed 5 million from the
that's just Boris Johnson just rounding off his last.
To support the extension of the
he's just
Edinburgh
wrapping up.
Borders Railway to Carlisle.
There we are. Talking about the railway to Carlisle.
The leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer.
Here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his remarks about the 7/7 anniversary? I remember where I was on that day, and we'll never forget it. I'm sure that's the same for everybody, and we will never forget all those affected, especially the family and friends of all those who died. Can I join the Prime Minister in his comments about Fayellen as well, and also about football, and wish the very best of luck to the England football team this evening. I'm sure the whole country, with the possible exception of the Conservative MP for Ashfield, will be watching this evening and cheering England on.
That's Lee Anderson.
Just to explain, who is the Conservative MP for Ashfield?
Who, citing the team's decision to take a knee, said he would boycott every single one of England's games. So,
and he's been the subject of some ridicule, even by some of his own colleagues.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
He's the only person in England not watching the football. 28 million people or whatever it was.
Someone should send one of those TV licensing vans outside Lee Anderson's house to check that he really isn't watching the football.
Right, that's enough of that silliness. Let's go back to the Commons.
Mr. Speaker, can I also extend a special welcome to the new member for Batley and Spen? And will members opposite forgive me if I just turn round to look at the new member for Batley and Spen as she sits there on these benches beneath the plaque to Jo Cox, her sister. And that's a special and emotional moment for all of us on these benches. And I think for everybody across this House, it takes incredible courage and bravery to stand in that constituency and to sit on these benches beneath that plaque.
Kim Ledbetter, of course, who won the by-election last week.
Mr. Speaker, we all want our economy to open and to get back to normal. The question is whether we do it in a controlled way or a chaotic way. The Health Secretary told the House yesterday that under the government's plan, infections could go as high as 100,000 a day. Now, a number of key questions fall from that. First, if infections reach that level, 100,000 per day, what does the Prime Minister expect the number of hospitalisations, deaths, and the number of people with long COVID will be in that eventuality?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, there are a number of projections, and they're available from the SPI-M graphs. But it's certainly true, Mr. Speaker, that we are seeing a wave of cases because of the Delta variant. But scientists are also absolutely clear that we have severed the link between infection and serious disease and death. And currently there are only a 30th of the deaths that we were seeing at an equivalent position in previous waves of this pandemic. And that has been made possible thanks to the vaccine rollout, the fastest of any European country. And I think what people would like to hear from the party opposite, because I wasn't quite clear from that opening question, is whether or not they support the progress that this country is intending to make on July the 19th or not, Mr. Speaker. He says it's reckless to go ahead. Does that mean he's opposing it?
Oh.
There was a lot in, as Boris Johnson himself. Boris Johnson likes to call, such incoherent answers as that as minestrone. But there are a few notable croutons in there, as he himself would say, and has said in columns before. I think it was interesting that he said we're clearly seeing a quite sharp divergence between what the government scientific advisors are saying and what the government is saying. You hear Boris Johnson say the link between cases and hospitalisations and deaths has been severed. I mean, nobody is saying that. I mean, the question and the gamble is the extent to which they've been weakened. And obviously, Chris Whitty said yesterday, on the heels of Sajid Javid saying, roll on every 100,000 people getting COVID a day, that actually cases should be kept at a minimum. So it's really quite striking that ministers are now leaning into this to the extent that they are. And to hear the Prime Minister say it himself is quite striking, I think.
And it was interesting when Keir Starmer asked for what does that mean for hospitalisations and deaths. He just said there are a number of projections from the SPI-M on the SPI-M graph. SPI-M is the Scientific Pandemic Influenza Group on Modelling. I'm not sure if that means he knows what they say, but they're bad, so he doesn't want to say it, or he wasn't totally sure if he actually knew the answer to Keir Starmer's question.
Knowing the Prime Minister, I think it's probably a bit of both. And also, I think the government's gamble is that one will fall. The hospitalisation deaths will fall at the lower end of those projections, i.e., okay, the link hasn't been severed, but the increase will be so negligible in terms of NHS capacity that we don't have to worry about it. But it's interesting, Sajid Javid is saying, I'm not the COVID secretary, I'm the health secretary. I'm here to cater for people with all conditions. But if you listen to hospital leaders, they say, look, hospitalisation increased by 38% last week. Even if they continue increasing at this rate from a low base, again, we're back into this territory where routine operations are being delayed, etc., etc. So as much as it's very easy to be blasé about this now, I think Keir Starmer will keep plugging away at this one.
Well, let's find out. Let's go back, Keir Starmer.
Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, we know that the link between infection rates and deaths has been weakened, but it hasn't been broken. Yeah. And the Prime Minister must, and he certainly should know the answer to the question that I asked him. That he won't answer it here in the House hardly inspires confidence in his plan. Mr. Speaker, let's be clear why infection rates are so high. Because the Prime Minister let the Delta, or we can call it the Johnson variant, into the country. And let's be clear why the number of cases will surge so quickly, because he is taking all protections off in one go. That is reckless. The SAGE papers yesterday, Mr. Speaker, make clear that with high infection rates, there's a greater chance of new variants emerging, greater pressure on the NHS, more people will get long COVID, and test and trace will be less effective. Yeah. Knowing all that, is the Prime Minister really comfortable with a plan that means 100,000 people catching this virus every day and everything that entails?
Just to jump in there, I'm quite struck that I think the answer to Boris Johnson's question of whether or not Labour is supporting his plan is the answer is no. I suspect the Prime Minister is comfortable with his own plan. The Johnson variant, somebody's just tweeted in saying they like that. Christina says there's a good jibe. It's possibly something that Labour could have got up running a few weeks ago.
Yeah, unlike so much of Labour's comms operation, a criticism the new bloods in Keir Starmer's office make and Labour MPs make is that Labour are in the habit of releasing, 10-paragraph press releases after the fact, where if you take the top paragraph off, it could refer to literally any news story on any day of the week in any country. Whereas Keir Starmer's questions, as last week, are punchy, they're sharp, they're pointed, and actually they're, not a sentence not a word you often hear used in the context of Keir Starmer saying anything, but they're actually quite funny.
Well, let's go back and see if Boris Johnson is comfortable with his own plan.
Mr. Speaker, I really think we need to hear from what the Honourable what he actually supports. We will continue with a balanced and reasonable approach, and I've given the reasons. This country has rolled out the fastest vaccination programme anywhere in Europe. The vaccines provide more than 90% protection against hospitalisation, both of them. Mr. Speaker, by the 19th of July, we will have vaccinated, every adult will have been offered one vaccination. Everybody over 40, Mr. Speaker, will have been offered two vaccinations. That is an extraordinary achievement. That's allowing us to go ahead. Now, last week, Mr. Speaker, or earlier this week, he seemed to support opening up, getting rid of the 1 metre rule. He seemed to support getting back into nightclubs and getting back into pubs without masks, Mr. Speaker. But if he doesn't support it, perhaps he could clear it up now. Is it reckless or not, Mr. Speaker?
I think we'll just plough through, but it's much the same as the first answer, really. He's quite happy with what he's doing, and he wants to know whether or not Keir Starmer supports it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because usually the concluding flourish of this, and where Labour's attacks on the government over lockdown have traditionally been quite weak, is that they would, drive from the back seat, quibble with the small print, and then would troop through the division lobbies to approve it in the end anyway. So it all seemed a little bit like dancing on the head of the pin. But now you have a very clear distinction between the two positions. They're actually arguing diametrically opposed for the first time on COVID, I think, over the course of the whole pandemic.
It's interesting. And Keir Starmer being ahead of the argument rather than Captain Hindsight. He's trying to position himself as Captain Foresight. Let's go back then. Question number 3 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, we should open up in a controlled way. Keeping baseline protections such as masks on public transport, improving ventilation, making sure the track and trace system remains effective, and ensuring proper payments for self-isolation. The Prime Minister can't just wish away the practical problems that 100,000 infections a day are going to cause. Can't wish them away. The next obvious one is the huge number of people who will be asked to isolate. If there are 100,000 infections a day, that means hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people are going to be pinged to isolate. The Financial Times estimates this morning that could be around 2 million people per week. The Mail says 3.5 million people a week. Either way, it's a massive number. It means huge disruption to families and businesses just as the summer holidays begin. So we know what the FT thinks. We know what the Mail thinks, what their estimates are. Can the Prime Minister tell us how many people does he expect will be asked to isolate if infection rates continue to rise at this rate?
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank everybody who self-isolates. They're doing the right thing. They're a vital part of this country's protection against the disease. And what we'll be doing is moving away from self-isolation towards testing in the course of the next few weeks. And that is the prudent approach, because we will have, Mr. Speaker, vaccinated even more people. But what he can't explain, he can't have it both ways. He says it's reckless. It's reckless to open up, Mr. Speaker, and yet he attacks self-isolation, Mr. Speaker, which is one of the key protections that this country has. And let me ask him again. On Monday, he seemed to say he was in favour. He seemed to say he was in favour of opening up on July the 19th. Now he's saying it's reckless. Which is it, Mr. Speaker?
I think interesting question from Keir Starmer again.
Yeah.
Goes to speaks to the extent to which his operation is sharpened up. It's all about now, and you can tell the Blairites have taken over the asylum. It's all about they just need to hammer away at 3 things that you can fit on a pledge card. So now it's clear, and we're going to be hearing this till we're sick of it: ventilation, proper self-isolation, and I can't remember the third. But that's clearly because he hasn't. Yes, and masks, and
mask ventilation, and proper funding,
yes,
payments
exactly.
for people who have to
and we're just going
self-isolate.
to hear Labour in every intervention say that again and again and again, I think.
I understand the thing about ventilation. I find a bit odd. What does he want Boris Johnson to do? Give everyone more windows? Make it compulsory to have windows open at all times? Is that Labour's policy?
Free air conditioning units for the blind? I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's but you're right. It is sharp, and for real nerds of these things, it is unusual for the leader of the Labour Party to stand up and say at the dispatch box he's been reading both the Financial Times and the Daily Mail, and by citing both of them, that is a way of showing what a broad church he is now straddling.
Yes,
if you
yes.
do indeed straddle a church, not a horse. Anyway, let's go back and see. This is question number 4 now from Keir Starmer.
Maybe I can help a little, just to remind us that it's Prime Minister's questions. If we want opposition questions, we'll need to change standing up. Yes.
I mean, not the best
The question
joke
was
there from
simply
Lindsay
how many
Hoyle.
people are going to be asked to self-isolate if there's 100,000 infections a day, and he won't answer it. And we know why he won't answer it and pretends I'm asking a different question. He ignored the problems in schools. Now there's 700,000 children off per week because he ignored it. Now he's ignoring the next big problem that's heading down the track and going to affect millions of people who have to self-isolate. Now, it won't feel like Freedom Day to those who have to isolate, when they're having to cancel their holidays, when they can't go to the pub or even to their kids' sports day. And it won't feel like Freedom Day, Prime Minister, to the businesses who are already warning of carnage because of the loss of staff and customers. It must be obvious, with case rates that high, his plan risks undermining the track and trace system that he spent billions and billions of pounds on. Prime Minister, there are already too many stories of people deleting the NHS app. He must have seen those stories. And they're doing it because they can see what is coming down the track. Now, of course, we don't support that, Mr. Speaker, but under his plan, it's entirely predictable. What is the Prime Minister going to do to stop people deleting the NHS track because they can see precisely what he can't see, which is millions of them are going to be pinged this summer to self-isolate?
Mr. Speaker, of course, we're going to continue with the programme of self-isolation for long as that is necessary. I thank all those who are doing it. But, of course, what we're also doing is moving to a system of testing rather than self-isolation. And we can do that. We can do that because of the massive rollout of the vaccine programme. And what I'm still not, and I think about the 4th or 5th time, Mr. Speaker, it's still not clear whether he's actually in favour of this country moving forward to step 4 on the basis of the massive rollout of vaccine. And yes, of course, Mr. Speaker, this is unlike the law where you can attack from lots of different positions at once. To oppose, you must have a credible and clear alternative. I simply do not hear that. Is he in favour of us moving forward, yes or no? It's completely impossible to tell.
Oh, go on, let's hear what...
Once again, it's Prime Minister's questions and the Prime Minister answers questions. Keir Starmer.
Boris Johnson, we had Lindsay Hoyle on a couple of weeks ago, and he claimed that he'd sort of had a sort of kiss and make up conversation with Boris Johnson, and they were going to get along much better. But that doesn't seem to have, the truce doesn't seem to have held.
No, and that is one of his most persistent complaints, that it's Boris Johnson is trying to turn it into, I don't know, Lotok.
But, I mean, I suppose whether or not he's directly asking Keir Starmer a question, it is true to say that while Keir Starmer's questions are sharper, they're more to the point, they are on the sort of things that normal people are talking about, it isn't actually clear if he thinks you can't on the one hand warn about the carnage that's coming for businesses, whereas Boris Johnson's response is, well, that's why we're opening up, because businesses want their customers back and all that. So it's not actually clear whether or not Keir Starmer thinks we should be lifting all restrictions on July the 19th.
you not think? I mean, I suppose, like you say, it's when he advances the argument that, as you say, some of those inconsistencies become more obvious. But let's say it's actually, for the first time in a very long time, a clear line of attack is very easy to discern from the Labour Party, and I'm getting real mileage out of this lunch, by the way. Every answer, a new vignette comes back into my head. Another mouthful of too expensive steak that it's the mindset. I think this is something people who worked with Keir Starmer when he was Shadow Brexit Secretary used to say. He used to take, and this is a criticism they make of him. He said he used to pretend or act as if he was Shadow Brexit Secretary. He was the real Brexit Secretary, and he was unwilling to take any position that they wouldn't be able to do in government. People who come into Keir Starmer's office now are saying, we're the opposition. We can say anything we like. But we're not making these decisions.
Yes.
Nobody will remember.
I suppose that's the point. A bit of inconsistency doesn't matter if you're landing a political political blow. Let's go back. What's been out to question 5 from Keir Starmer?
If he stopped mumbling and listened, he'd have heard the answer the first time. We want to open in a controlled way and keep in line baseline protections that can keep down infections, like mandatory face masks on public transport. Now, we know that will protect people, reduce the speed of the virus and the spread of the virus, and it won't harm the economy. It's common sense. Why can't the Prime Minister see that?
Prime Minister.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, we can see that it's common sense for people in confined spaces to wear a face mask out of respect and courtesy to others, such as on the tube. But what we're doing, Mr. Speaker, is cautiously, prudently moving from legal diktat to allowing people to take personal responsibility for their actions. And that is the right way forward, Mr. Speaker. And I must say that if really that is the only difference between us, if he supports absolutely everything else, so opening pubs, opening nightclubs, getting rid of the 1 metre rule, getting people back to work, and it's all about whether the difference between making face masks mandatory or advisory on the tube. If that is the only difference between us, Mr. Speaker, then that is good news. But I'd like to hear him clarify that.
I think that Boris Johnson's managed to sort of manoeuvre himself into a much better position with that answer than he did on any of the others.
Yes, he always seems to manage that on the 6th.
But there is a bigger point of difference, isn't there? Keir Starmer is just laying out now that he is not actually supporting what the government's doing, but so that in a couple of weeks' time, when cases have gone through the roof, there's concern about the number of people who are self-isolating. There's maybe more concern about rising numbers in hospitals and so on. He'll be able to say, "I told you so," rather than, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that," which has basically been what he's been doing for the last year.
Yes, we told you so, and also, as I was saying earlier about the 3 points and flog them to death. This is Labour's version of long-term economic plan. The hope is that in a month's time, if the Prime Minister has to get up and say, remember that pick and mix approach we advocated about masks, well, actually, we're going to remandate them on public transport or whatever. Keir Starmer, people might make the link and say, hang on, the Labour Party have been banging on about that for a very long time. This government are indeed as hopeless as they say.
Keir Starmer was right, which I suppose is the position that he wants to get in. This is PMQs Unpacked, where we pause the action live from the House of Commons. I'm joined by Patrick Maguire, editor of the Times Red Box. Let's get the last exchange then from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, he agrees it's common sense because it protects the public, but he won't make it mandatory. It's ridiculous. It's clear what this is all about. He's lost a health secretary, he's lost a by-election, and he's getting flack from his own MPs. So he's doing what he always does, crashing over to the other side of the aisle, chasing headlines and coming up with a plan that hasn't been thought through. We all want restrictions lifted, we want our economy open, and we want to get back to normal. But we've been here too many times before. Isn't it the case that once again, instead of a careful, controlled approach, we're heading for a summer of chaos and confusion?
It's quite bold to mention losing a by-election by Keir Starmer. Let's take a listen.
No, Mr. Speaker, is the answer to that. These are, of course, these are difficult decisions. They need to be taken in a balanced way, and that's what we're doing. And throughout the pandemic, to do all these things, frankly, Mr. Speaker, takes a great deal of drive, and it takes a great deal of leadership to get things done. And if we'd followed his advice, Mr. Speaker, if we'd followed his advice, we would still be in the European Medicines Agency.
Hey,
we would never,
drink.
it's absolutely, we would never have rolled out
Every
the
single week
vaccines
we
as
get
fast.
that.
If we'd followed his advice, Mr. Speaker, we would never have got schools open again with all the damage to kids' education. And frankly, Mr. Speaker, if we listened to him, we would not now be proceeding cautiously, pragmatically, sensibly to reopen our society and our economy and give people back the chance to enjoy the freedoms they love. We're getting on with taking the tough decisions to take this country forward, Mr. Speaker. We vaccinate, they vacillate.
There's another one.
We inoculate,
Yep.
Mr. Speaker, while they're invertebrate.
Well, that's a new one.
Well, actually, the government, as is on the front page of the Times today, is actually preparing to recognise that invertebrates feel pain and can feel an ascension. So not quite the attack that Boris Johnson thinks it is.
That's the plan to end the boiling alive of lobsters.
And which you know, if I can stretch this metaphor to breaking point, I'm not entirely sure that Boris Johnson boiled Keir Starmer alive with that answer. It's very interesting to hear Keir Starmer quote Dominic Cummings, though not mentioning him by name, with the old shopping trolley attack on the Prime Minister. I thought that was interesting.
That was interesting. I mean, there was a lot of, once we're onto the European Medicines Agency, we know that Boris Johnson's just sort of killing time.
Yes, although I hate to make this my own weekly vaccine jibe at the government.
But yeah, because actually your prediction, whatever it was, that maybe too much wine had been consumed by the time you'd got onto your
Well,
suggestions.
it's interesting though,
because he didn't raise the fact that the vaccine rates are low.
But I hate to, give out more freelance comms advice. But it's pro bono. I'm not charging for this. But the European Medicines Agency think we're fast reaching the point where some EU nations are catching up with us in terms of second jabs. So give it a couple of weeks, and Keir Starmer might be able to say, "Hey, if we were in the European Medicines Agency, more people would be double jabbed." I don't know, but I certainly hope so because I need to justify my expense claims.
Well, we've had loads of messages in today. As always, they are all over the place. Somebody says, "Why do you always give Starmer more credit than he deserves?" Somebody else says, Starmer can beat the drum as much as he likes regarding unlocking being reckless. The population don't agree. Someone else says, Starmer should not answer any of the PM's questions. It's not opposition's question time. Then somebody else said that Starmer is a joke, and so on and so on. In fact, Claire, you remember, was on the show a couple of weeks ago. Claire's got cancer, was talking about, how she wants to make... improve the experience of dying, and she says that so dismissive of people with immune issues and ignoring issues of vulnerable children, teens in schools. We know we can't shield forever, but could do with more compassion, honesty over the risk. Death numbers might be low, but it's still super scary if you know it's likely to be you. That's obviously aimed at Boris Johnson. I mean, we've covered the full range there, full gamut of views about PMQs. That's the end of PMQs Unpacked, where we pause the action between Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer.